Well, good evening, everybody. Great to see you. Welcome to Holywell. Great to see so many current students, and welcome back to the alumni I can see around. And a special welcome to those of you online who are watching on the recording, particularly the alumni. Today is Giving Day in Wadham, so we're particularly grateful for students and fellows who've contributed to the Giving Day success here, but also to all of those who are giving online. It really makes a difference. Everything we do, particularly in extending opportunity to students who wouldn't otherwise think of Oxford, is down to the generosity of fellows too, actually, but of alumni. So thank you. We really appreciate it. As you know, we have been holding over the last year a series of events where we've invited back alumni who are doing remarkable things to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the admission of the first women undergraduates at Wadham. And we've had a number of events this year, and I'm absolutely delighted to welcome back two alumni, Erica Whyman and Felicity Jones. Erica, as you may have read, is at the moment a visiting fellow here in Wadham and at the Schwarzman Centre for the Humanities. But she studied modern languages and philosophy in 1988, I think, and actually was taught by Christina Howells, who is here somewhere, I think. She's actually on her way. And she was the first woman fellow at Wadham. So Erica's career has been extraordinary in the theatre, running a number of major theatre companies, including, of course, the Royal Shakespeare Company. She is at the moment researching and, more importantly, in practice doing the study of theatre as a builder of community here in Oxford, and also as a tool for reimagining democracy, which is timely and I think a very modern thing to be doing. So we really admire what you're doing, and thank you for all you're doing in the college as well. And Erica is going to be in conversation with Felicity Jones. And I'm not going to talk about Felicity's career because that's the whole point of the next 30 minutes. But just to say, we are immensely proud to have one of the foremost actors of this generation as an alumnus. So, and she's sitting alongside one of her tutors, Professor Ankhi Mukjerhee, who will be hosting the Q&A. And of course, her other tutor was Bernard O'Donoghue, who unfortunately can't be here, but many of you will know him. So I'm going to stop there. A couple of practical things before we start. One is, of course, I have to say where the fire exits are. They are obvious. They're behind you and behind the stage. I'm sure we won't need them. The other thing is, at the request of all those participating, please don't take photos. Save your selfies and cameras for later. It is being recorded and that'll be available to everyone. So appreciate your help there. With that, I'm going to hand over to Erica, and the way we're going to run this is Erica and Felicity will have a conversation for about 30 minutes, and then Ankhi is going to host the Q&A, so I'm sure there'll be lots of questions. And after that, we'll all go for drinks in the new building. Everybody is welcome before they go to dinner. So thank you all for coming. Above all, thank our guests, and over to you, Erica.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody, very much for coming. And what an honour for us to have this opportunity to have a conversation with Felicity. When we were thinking about this event, I was struck by the fact in my own life, which is often late at night, I find myself watching the first 10 minutes of On the Basis of Sex and going, I can't possibly watch it again, there's no need for that. And then 2 o'clock in the morning, I'm still thinking about it, having watched all of it. And I said to Felicity that I was struck by the fact that in the context of her amazing career, there have been a number of different women that you've played who've had a relationship with universities. I should have started, I noticed that Robert ducked any description of Felicity's amazing achievements. I should have started by saying that, of course, you are a many awarded and nominated, and currently, very recently, nominated for twice for Oscars, and many times for BAFTAs and many awards, and most recently, I'm sure, in our heads, and we will talk about it in a little bit, for the brilliant film, The Brutalist. But I was struck by this kind of connection through some of your films of universities and women in universities. So we're going to talk a little bit about the relationship to here and to Wadham, and then I promise I'll get onto a few things that Felicity's done recently. So I wonder if we might start by you saying a little bit about your relationship to this place. I mean, what's it like to be back?
Well, it's absolutely lovely. Thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you for having me back. So nice to see everyone here tonight. Yes, I think I was thinking coming here, and I was sort of reflecting on what Wadham meant, and and I think for the first time it was coming to Wadham and coming to Oxford that I actually felt that I could truly be myself, perhaps in a way that I hadn't in my school years. Suddenly, it just felt as though there was a relaxation. I felt as though I was supported, but at the same time, it was the sheer independence to not only study and learn, but to get incredibly intoxicated. So that that wonderful duality, it was in many ways sort of the first time that I felt a real sense of freedom. And we were just chatting earlier about the foundation of Wadham for so many of us was friendship, and that is something that I'm so thankful to Wadham for meeting the best friends of my life. You know, friends that I'm 20 years later as close to as I was when I was here studying. So it's it's that combination of the foundation of your social life, but also your intellectual life.
Yeah.
And you know, like those women, like Ruth Bader Ginsburg, it is that foundation I felt from doing the tutorials, the rigor of learning. It really sets you up for anything. Yes. And in many ways, you can apply it to so many different things. That foundation of being able to absorb information incredibly quickly, being able to know what is the pertinent argument. Yeah. And that's something that is so true to storytelling as well. That in writing an essay, you're pushing an argument. And in many ways, making a film, a play is you know, in the best ones, you're pushing an ideology, you're pushing an argument.
Yeah. You had done quite a lot of acting before you came here. So what was that relationship for you between performance and storytelling, and then the intellectual work that was clearly another kind of home for you?
Yes, I'd started acting when I was quite young, when I was sort of 11, 12 years old. I'd done a television series. I started doing something called The Treasure Seekers, and then I did a series about a witch school, which was great fun to do with broomsticks and very scratchy black cats. And so it'd been very much part of my life, I guess, from quite a young age. So when I came to university and came to Wadham, in many ways, it was sort of quite nice to have a bit of distance from that. Yes. And go, actually, you know, is that something that I want to continue doing? And it turned out it was. But in many ways, I think Wadham just gave me a much broader platform, much broader perspective on life, and a confidence as well. Yes. That perhaps if it didn't work out, you know, there was, hopefully I could put my hand to something else.
Yeah, that's a different kind of foundation, isn't it? Just as important, yeah. Could we talk a little bit about those several films that you made over a period of years, where you were playing women who had very different relationships to universities, whether it's Brideshead or Theory of Everything, and then I've mentioned, and you have On the Basis of Sex, where actually Ruth really has to fight for her right to stay in a university.
Yes, I mean, with Ruth's case particularly, she was one of, I think, 2 or 3 women at Harvard at that time. So she was really pushing against conventions of what was expected of a woman at that time, which then obviously she continues to do through her legal work. But what it's interesting with, and then Jane Hawking, in a very different way, has got this monstrous determination and push, and she's pushing very much for Stephen Hawking to have the appropriate access for wheelchairs, and they're both women who are fearless in the face of obstacles.
Yes.
I feel, fortunately, our experience was very different coming to an institution. But yes, for Ruth, it was an incredible balancing act as well, because she was also a mother.
Yeah.
And her husband was very ill, and he was also doing a degree, so she was helping him with his work as well as doing her own essays and preparation. So yeah, she was quite a formidable person.
I mean, an extraordinary person, and had to be both patient and determined and fierce to keep going after those experiences at Harvard. I think one of the things that draws me addictively back to that film is it's such a perfect example or illustration of juggling, as you say, that still, I perhaps didn't think this when I was here as an undergraduate, but still there is a set of demands, often more on women than on men, to try and think about whatever those caring responsibilities are, whether it's about fighting for access or whether it's about juggling one's own family or caring at the same time. And do you recognise that thread in some of those roles, that the demands of that?
Yes, I think that, I think it's something that we're wrestling with and understanding within a household, achieving that balance. I feel increasingly there is a generational shift, and there is a lot more awareness of sharing that juggle, and long may it continue.
Yeah. I wonder, I'm sure you get this question a great deal, and I know that it's not as simple as it sounds, but how much choice do you feel you have nowadays over the roles that you want to play? Because there do seem to be these wonderful threads through them about women who are very determined to be themselves, when, for different reasons, the world is not keen on them being themselves.
Yeah, it can be harder in real life sometimes than it can on film.
Yeah,
that's very true. I think it's just patience. I think that's something that I've learnt, that things don't often come easily, and increasingly I'm becoming more interested in developing those projects, not only for myself but for other actresses.
Yes.
That there are those opportunities and those roles, because I do believe that through storytelling you can shift perception in the world, and if you tell certain stories, then hopefully you're making a dent on those perceptions, and you create, hopefully, the world you would like to see.
Yeah, it feels more important now to me than ever. I think it was always a drive for me, but it's in the world that we're operating in, and I mean that in a number of different senses, a very divided world, but also very driven by market forces in both what you and I do.
So,
It is harder perhaps than one's ideal undergraduate self might have thought to make the stories that we need to hear.
Yes, and interestingly, people don't realise, that in the case of something like The Brutalist, there wasn't really a market for the film to be made. There's so many obstacles to getting that film produced, because the market's very unsure about something like that. The material is difficult. How much do people really want to see this? And but it's testimony to those, the filmmaker and everyone involved, that by pushing through and making these things, there is an audience. Yes. And people don't necessarily know what they want until it's there. But yes, if ever you're telling a story that's a little bit more complicated than pure entertainment, then it's a more difficult thing to get it made.
Would you tell us a bit more about The Brutalist? Because it is, I'm sure everyone's seen it, but I find it a completely beguiling film. It's very, very beautiful. It's shot on film, which is unusual. And it's a tough watch. It's a very upsetting piece of work, but it feels so rich and so, rigorous, the word that we were sort of knocking around ahead of this, about where is the rigor in our stories. And it's so rigorous, and it's unashamed of the scale of its ideas. Would you tell us a bit about how it got made? Because you were attached to it from early on.
Yes, yeah, it's a film that sort of overreaches in every sense, and I was involved quite early on. I'd known Brady Corbet, the director, for many years before that. We'd met when we were in our 20s, and I was just sent this script and I'd been reading lots of different things at the same time. There was nothing that was, well, it was all pretty drudgy, and I think no one's going to want to see this, pretty mediocre really. And then The Brutalist came along, and it just was beautifully written. It was like reading a novel.
Yes.
And to have a film like that is so rare these days. That had the ambition that it was going to be 3.5 hours long, that it was going to be shot on film, that the characters were all completely unexpected, all these idiosyncrasies, just something you would very much expect in a novel, but not in a film. So it was just very early on, I knew 100% that I wanted to be involved in it. And then it was so much with filmmaking these days, it's completely contingent, your finance on the cast.
Yeah.
So you have, it's sort of a bit like a popularity contest. You have to have certain casts bring more finance than others, even though people are excellent. It's very frustrating, but they don't bring enough income in to get the film made. So it's a bit of a sort of poisonous balancing act. Unfortunately, Adrian Brody, who's excellent, and Guy Pearce, who's excellent, wanted to be involved. And once we had that and just about enough to make it, then we went for it.
And you had quite a lot of preparation, I imagine, for your role as Erzsebet. I don't know if I'm saying that right.
Yes,
right.
Yeah.
How much you did a lot on I imagine, that brilliant accent.
Yes, yeah. Well, that's what was so brilliant, was having the time to prepare. Actually, I almost ended up having about 2 years of preparation on it, so that I could. I work very closely with a dialect coach, and it almost comes back to sort of my Oxford days. In some ways, we spend a lot of time investigating, reading about the world that the character comes from.
Yes.
We had a great, there was a piece of archive in the British Library of a woman who'd gone through a very similar experience to the character that I was playing. And we used her as a template for the voice.
I see.
And finding Erzsebet's cadence and the pitch of her voice and the accent.
There's something wonderful when you arrive in the film that suddenly the whole world tips on its axis. So we've got this, we sort of think we know the story that we're watching. We have a sense, of course, through your voice of who's coming. And then it's almost literally like somehow it feels like there's a kind of vertigo, because she's so fabulously herself, so strong, so inhabited. And we have been told, I think, through, I don't know, the beginnings of the film, but maybe also the way that stories work, that's not quite who we think we're going to meet.
Well, you're because I think you've been watching the film for about 90 minutes, so your anticipation is peaked, and then you have an interval, and then finally you get to meet Erzsebet and her niece. So the stakes are pretty high when you come into the film. But as you say, and then the whole tenor, it becomes a sort of, well, it's part 2, isn't it? It becomes a different thing in many ways when the women arrive.
What did you like about her?
I loved, on a superficial level, I loved her. I had a great wig that I loved wearing. That was just beautiful. It was an Italian wig maker. It's absolutely beautifully made, and that. I feel like that did most of my work for me, actually. I just put on that thing and I was sort of good to go. It sort of had a kind of slightly 50s quality to it. And so that was in many ways, that was a way into Erzsebet.
I wonder if I can ask you about how, if you think about all of the women that you've played, Is there something you think you're choosing? Whether we've talked about how tricky that can be, and you know the projects come when they come, but do you think there's something that you're particularly drawn to in terms of the kind of women that you enjoy playing?
I guess I try not to have too many preconceptions before I read something. I recently played a grandmother moon. So I never sort of, and that was, you know, just because it was totally different.
Yeah.
And she is a whole different process of preparation, playing a moon. So it can be, it's sort of just what kind of gets you and what keeps you reading, and it's not necessarily just the character, it's also what is that story saying, what are you know, everyone, we spend years making these things, and what are you putting into the world, what is alongside that character, what is the film saying, and what impact is that going to have, and that might be that it's really funny or entertaining, or it might be, you know, that it's hopefully going to shift something. So it's that combination of the character and the story.
And a story that touches you, but also has the sense that it might last, it might make a shift in the world.
Yes.
I quite a long time ago now, I made a musical about Joan Littlewood. I was sort of listening to you talking about putting together this enormous movie. It was very, very tiny, but there was a similar thing in miniature, in that no one thought they wanted to see a show about a theatre maker, and trying to persuade people of that. And it's a very joyful piece of work, but it is about a remarkable woman who broke all sorts of ground in the theatre, and was, I think, I became very fond of Joan doing the research for that piece, but I think she was really brutal. So she's also really interesting, because she's not a saint, she's not an angel, she's not an easy woman, but was definitely fighting off kind of the forces of British theatre and beyond. And there was something so satisfying about getting to a point where we could share that with an audience and discover that actually our instincts were right. And I imagine there's a long delay for you,
but similarly, there's something when you have a character who's a little bit sort of naughty. There's almost more satisfaction in it. In people coming to see that person, because it's not, you know, it's harder to put that story into the world.
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of,
but even more important.
Even more important, particularly, I suppose, well, we've both lived through an era where we have seen quite a lot of storytelling about interesting women, and yet we have these sort of new cliches about what that means. So finding women where it isn't so straightforward. They aren't a magic hero, but they are, in fact. I mean, I think of Jane Hawking when I say that. I think perhaps that quite complex person to be around, but incredibly strong.
Yes, I think with any, I mean, you must find this. You want any characters that you're exploring. You want their sort of you want the intricacy of that person to come across. And, you know, human beings are complex, difficult, multifaceted things. So you know, that's part of the, you know, job of a director and an actor, is to hopefully convey the truth of the complexity of the human experience.
Have you ever met a character and found it difficult to like them, like too late, when you have agreed to play them?
I don't know. I feel as though you're sort of a bit of a psychologist or something, you know, you're sort of just observing. And interestingly, I heard that Timothée Chalamet hasn't met Bob Dylan, which I thought was interesting, but and did a wonderful, amazing portrayal of him. But it's interesting how some actors choose not to meet the real life counterparts, and why that might be. But I just find it interesting on a human level, just to meet this person, and I often find you pick up on things that you know, someone like Ruth Bader Ginsburg, people who've been very successful tend to tell the same stories over and over again, you know, in different
Yes.
in different sort of media outlets. So it's trying to get underneath those
Yes.
stories, and you're just picking up on behaviour and idiosyncrasy, and you know, even something as simple as the way they pick up a cup or something. You know, that's what I find interesting to look for.
To come back to the Brutalist for a minute, you talked about being drawn to stories that put something into the world. I feel like I'm still processing it, having watched it twice, that there's so much in it that reflects our own world. But I wonder for you what it is that it puts into the world.
I think, I mean, it's one of those, hopefully it's multifaceted. I think it's about capitalism, it's about immigration, it's about love, it's, you know, hopefully it's colossal in its themes. But I think it's done in a way that is incredibly, is both looking back and looking forwards.
Yes.
And that partly comes from Brady Corbett. I think he's 36, which is quite young it feels quite young for a director. Wow. So it has that, it's very respectful of, you know, the history of cinema, but also there's a punkish quality to it, and it's trying to turn it on its head.
Also felt to me to be about art and sort of, in some sense, in defence of that artistic endeavour.
Very much, yeah.
Including what might seem to be a folly.
Yes.
Or might seem impossible to make happen, but to pursue it at almost all costs.
Yeah, the struggle to put something into the world that you believe in and wholeheartedly stand by.
Yeah.
And definitely the struggle of doing that, told through an architect.
I mean, I certainly recognise the sense that if you're trying to make any art in any way, in a tiny way or in a big way, that you're up against, we've already touched on it tonight, but you're up against so many things that would rather you put a product into the world that was recognisable, that was packaged up before you began. It felt powerfully about that, about saying, no, that's not who I am, the artist. There's something else I'm on the earth to do.
Well, and I think that's what is increasingly, you know, more difficult in some ways is finding is pursuing originality.
Yes.
And thinking outside of those market forces.
Yeah.
Because in terms of film, there's always a place for just pure entertainment. But those stories that might challenge us or make you think about something differently. I went to see David Attenborough's Ocean.
Oh, yes.
Which is an extraordinary film, and completely changes the way you perceive eating fish.
Yeah.
That, you know, and that a piece of, you know, cinema can do that is if you see the film you'll understand, but is extraordinary.
Do you think that there is still a place, it's a sort of daft question I realise because we've talked about the Brutalist doing exactly this, but do you think there is a place for a kind of intellectual rigour in filmmaking? Do you find yourself drawing on those? It sounds like you do. The things that you learnt here, that sense of homecoming and freedom in an intellectual foundation. How is that part of your work now?
Yeah, I mean, I found it's what I loved about being here was going to these libraries and just being in your own head and understanding something in microscopic detail.
Yes.
I feel is the greatest luxury to have the time to be able to do that. And I try and endeavour to do that when creating a character, is finding that being rigorous in the approach, because I get so much pleasure from it. From it's sort of trying to find is that continuation from studying, really.
Yeah. I mean, it is a proper gift. I just made a show about Benjamin Britten and Imogen Holst, again, a woman that lots of people have forgotten or didn't know about, or has somewhat been framed in light of her father's work or Benjamin Britten's work, who she collaborated with. And we were invited to Aldborough to spend some time there where they worked, and just having that time to delve really deep and read her diaries and have that and those tools that we maybe learnt here, to really be able to think about how then affects the way you tell the story, and not to get lost in the research, but to honour it, to bring it to life, I suppose.
And do you find that your time at Oxford has given you that sort of confidence to do that?
Yeah, it is confidence, isn't it? It's partly confidence that you feel that you can say something about whatever that research is, that you, I suppose for me, you know it can't be original, but you also know it or entirely, because you've also got this sense of kind of inheriting the complexity of intellectual achievement. But that's also a freedom, but you have the tools to investigate it and try and make something that is, if not original in a pure sense, is personal, is coming from you or from the artists you're working with. Yeah, for sure. Aldborough has a touch of what we're talking about, I think, so that it's reminded me of that sort of protected space in which to make art and do that kind of deep thinking, yeah.
And how much it needs protecting.
How much it needs protecting.
Because otherwise it can get lost so easily.
I mean, that era, because we've been talking about the Brutalist, which spans, and also, as well as being rather a beautifully long film, also spans many decades. I can't remember quite how many, 30 years, something like maybe a bit more.
Yes, I believe so. Yes,
something
we joined
like
them in the 50s and leave them in the 80s.
Yeah, so a very long period of time. But the early 50s feel like a very rich time to be thinking about, particularly, I mean, it's funny today, of course, thinking about V-Day and how very, very different the world seems, and yet something's going backwards. You presumably spend quite a lot of time in America. I wonder how that feels right now to be a filmmaker, to be trying to put stories into the world as that country changes so quickly.
Well, it's interesting, you're saying about VE Day. I mean, it feels as though some of the footage you're seeing, it doesn't feel that far off from what is happening right now. So how much do we learn?
Yeah.
But I mean, in terms of America, I mean, I think sometimes Los Angeles can have a bit of a terrible reputation, but what's extraordinary about it is it does bring people from all over the world, and it brings who are in pursuit of storytelling.
Yes.
And it's amazingly sort of democratic in that way, that it is a place that most people involved in filmmaking, television will have been through at some point.
Yes.
So it's actually I've had since about 2011, I've been going backwards and forwards there.
Yes.
My husband is director, and we actually met in Los Angeles. So it's a place that's actually is an amazing place for connecting people from globally, from all different nationalities and walks of life, and it's obviously it's a consistently shifting place, but I don't think I'd necessarily want to live there full time. I'm very happy living in England, but I've found it to be a sort of amazing resource in many ways, and have great friendships from there.
It's a lovely way to think about it, and I recognise it very much in the theatre, that there is a kind of community of storytellers or people trying to put stories in the world.
Key,
and that in spite of all the different pressures on our world, that we need that more than ever, and actually you can find solidarity within that, and courage and confidence.
Absolutely, and that's what I think university can be so brilliant at giving you, is that community. No matter what you go on to do, you can develop that foundation at university, and we can't do anything alone. And that's really, and even more so, community is, I think, in this, with shifting technology, community more than ever is so vital to give us purpose and meaning.
And when you talk about researching a character, I recognise that sense that actually we have imaginative ways of understanding one another, whether we're playing someone or whether just meeting someone or we're trying to get to know them, or build community. And there's so many things from what acting is or what storytelling is that we can bring into trying to live in a slightly more democratic world.
What you're forging.
I think we should probably leave it there and let you ask us some questions, but thank you so much for answering mine. Bless you.
Well, thank you both so very much for this extremely rich and multifaceted discussion. I wondered if Felicity had had anything to do with the fact that Erzsebet, I'm not going to try to pronounce her name, read English at Oxford.
Oh, she did. I know.
This is in the Brutalist. But yes, really, this was wonderful. So we have about 20 minutes for questions. So please feel free.
Thank you so much for doing this. As a seriously global star, how do you manage to avoid the entrapment of social media, where somebody will ask for your position on something and then it goes viral against you? I mean, it's a nightmare for any person in your shoes.
Yes, I think definitely doing press these days has got a little hotter, so to speak. Definitely compared to, sort of 10 years ago. I mean, with social media, that's something that I'm just always navigating. I think like anything, in moderation, these things can be great. And there's a way through social media that you can reach different audiences, and but I think you just have to. It's achieving balance with it. But I mean, in terms of the world of the soundbite, it definitely can make it. It can feel quite. You sometimes can feel you have to be quite careful, which is a shame, because sometimes being careful isn't the best way through things.
Thank you. It was really interesting. So I guess my question was, has there ever been a difference between how you originally envisioned a character and then how someone, say the director or someone else on a film set has envisioned that character?
Yes.
How much scope do you get to kind of bring your own interpretation of that character forward?
That's a good question. When you're given as much, again, this idea of freedom and independence is very key, then I feel one can flourish. You need the support, but you need to have the freedom to experiment and find it yourself. But I have been in an experience where someone has had a very different idea of the character from mine, and it is not an enjoyable experience at all. Yes, one that I hope to forget.
Caution to directors everywhere.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you for your talk. It was really interesting. I was just wondering, from a fellow Brummie, how has sort of growing up in Birmingham sort of shaped your outlook on life? Because obviously Birmingham's the second city. It's so vibrant and such a diverse and interesting place to grow up. I was wondering how that sort of shaped your Oxford experience and how that in turn sort of shaped your acting career as well.
I think it was everything. I think if I hadn't grown up in Birmingham, I don't know if I'd necessarily be acting. I went to an extraordinary drama group called the Central Junior Television Workshop, which was a philanthropic side to Central Television, in part, but also at the same time, they wanted a drama group where they could choose young actors from, for the television or they just used to do one-off films. And it was completely free. It was open to all children in the city. You had to audition, and it was through going to that workshop. And I had an amazing, amazing teacher called Colin Edwards. And we were all 11, 12-year-olds, and he treated us like we were university students. We'd be talking about Pinter, Stanislavski, and going to that workshop was through that I was able to get auditions. So I really feel those youth groups are they're so vital in getting you involved in the arts at a young age. So, and Birmingham's just, I just grew up going to the Birmingham Rep, going to see concerts, ballets, amazing sort of cultural resources. I also went to the RSC, that was a regular outing for our family. Birmingham's very, very important place for my career, really.
Thank you for coming and thank you for spending your time answering our questions. I'd like to ask, you mentioned how you think a kind of good film, like both is kind of trying to put something forward, some sort of ideology, but you also kind of mentioned how you value showing the complexity of individuals. Do you think in your work this is something you have to bridge, or do they kind of naturally align?
I think it's really working. They probably naturally align. But I mean, in the same way that even if you're doing, I've done sort of snowboarding comedies, you still want to find that complexity, even if it doesn't necessarily have a purely ideological intention. It might be in some way something like Chalet Girl. It's there underneath, that you can, no matter who you are, you can achieve. You can achieve what you would like to achieve. So I think ideally the two come together. I don't know if that answers your question, but not always.
I had a question which I think I should ask, because there's several second years here and they are reading Northanger Abbey, which is also something I taught Felicity. So, it's for those of you, very few of you who haven't read it, it's about this very young, impressionable girl who likes Gothic novels so much that everything becomes a Gothic novel. And then, of course, she has this awakening and coming of age. But then the very brilliant arch ending where life is actually a bit like a Gothic novel. You have the same sort of systems of oppression. I just want to ask you, Felicity, I mean, you went straight to the filming of Northanger Abbey after university. What was it like for you to have read this? And what was literature to you? I mean, what is your relationship, to this very meta quality that literature has?
Yes, well, I think you had prepared me for the role, Ankhi, for study. No work involved. I was good to go. I think, literature is the foundation of understanding character. So there's a very natural progression into acting and development of character and performance. And I think literature shows you that anything is possible in some ways, that you have, that you can take risks in terms of performance and character, and I love reading, and so whenever something is the literary adaptation, I like watching those as well. So hence, doing things like Brideshead and Northanger Abbey, it was just sort of a natural evolution, because I was so passionate about those as books. But it's very hard to make a great film from a great novel. Sometimes less good books make good cinema, because sometimes you need more plot.
So you talked a bit about kind of the practice of playing these like real people, and just now about something Catherine Morland, obviously a very well-known fictional character. I was wondering if there's anything that you find kind of creatively different about playing kind of when you play sort of a real person and compared to kind of a fictional character, if there's any kind of different kind of license you have with either one of those types of character and acting.
Yes, I think there's just so much more pressure when you play a real person. It just comes with more responsibility, and actually it was almost a bit of a relief with the Brutalist that it wasn't based on a real person. So it definitely maybe comes with a little bit more weight. And then there's, in terms of the reception of that, everyone has an opinion when you're playing a real person. Whereas I feel maybe if you're playing somebody made up, you have a little bit more artistic license.
Hello, I've got a question for both of you. Obviously, Felicity, your film. Obviously, Erica, you've been very involved in theatre. Do either of you really hanker to hop the fence?
You've done quite a lot of theatre, but... Well, it's tricky, this, because I want to say no, because I'm quite fearful of the idea of making film, because as a director, it's such a different medium, such a different role. think what I mean is I love directing actors. And in the theatre, I have the luxury of rehearsal and time in rehearsal to really get underneath the skin of character and text. I love playing with words. That's definitely comes from my time here. Like, really fascinated by that. And the cinema, I mean, Felicity might say differently, but the cinema wants fewer words and has much less time for the director to have that engagement with actors. So I'm a bit fearful of it. However, I do occasionally dream of projects that I go, oh, they'd be much better on screen. And yeah, I sometimes I think how wonderful to reach that scale of audience, because there's always a limit on, you know, even in a big theatre, there's always a limit. And that wonderful thing of it being in our, you know, our everyday conversation, whether we've seen The Brutalist or we haven't, I'm sure everyone here has, but you know, it's in our culture. That's what I envy about film, is the reach of it.
It's so true about cinema needing less words. Often you're kind of getting rid of dialogue, yes. Because you want the story to be told through the camera, yeah. Ideally, rather than what people are saying. But in terms of theatre, I absolutely love doing theatre, and actually, interestingly, doing a play and the character, it lives in you so much longer than a film. Even though a film it's sort of a film obviously lasts forever, and a play only lasts for that moment. But the experience, the way it lives with you, the characters that I played on stage have gone far deeper in many ways than the ones on film. So there's sort of a strange irony in that.
I can really imagine that. I mean, I think something happens by playing it every night and being therefore open to essentially a billion different ways that it could be, and the details shifting with each individual audience.
It's like
you're
spell.
Inhabiting it. Yes, like a spell. Exactly. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you for talking. But like, we've talked a lot about like the juxtaposition of like fictional characters versus real characters. And you've worked a lot on like franchise films because you've been in like Star Wars and Spiderman. What's the difference? Like, what's that like?
Between those kind of tentpole bigger films and then...
Like Oscar winners versus Spiderman.
Oh, yeah, I think probably the budget and the scale. You know, with something like Star Wars or Spiderman or Inferno, they're just... The sets are just enormous. You know, you're almost just you're like a tiny little Sylvanian, you know, like a little dot. So they're these huge worlds, whereas often, you know, something that you hope will be awards driven will be a few people talking in a room, and the room will often be quite small. So I think even just in a sort of location aspect, you are definitely on those bigger films, you are a cog in a huge machine. But ideally, you still want there to be a feeling of authenticity and intimacy. So you're very much at the mercy of the director in those, you know, those bigger, and particularly directors making those bigger films, they're almost CEO of a company as well as being a director, because you've got so many different, you know, the special effects, and there's so many different facets to it. But they're both enjoyable in quite different ways.
So you may have kind of touched on this already, but I think Oxford can be like a very vibrant place for drama and kind of theatre as a student. And I'm wondering how that kind of influenced you during your time here, and if you have any advice for people who are kind of engaging in that scene right now.
Yes, I had. I just remember having a great time doing a play that two of my friends from Wadham had written, which was not the finest piece of theatre ever created, but they were sort of enjoying. We were just enjoying experimenting, I guess. It was. I think it's a place where what's brilliant is you can find someone who wants to be a writer, someone, you know, who can direct, someone who can act, and you can start making things together. And I think that's the way to do it, really. The sooner that you just make it practical and you start doing it, the better. And then you build on those number of hours of experience. But I think more than anything, just have a go at making things, whether it's a short film or putting on a review or a play, do as much as possible. Doing it yourself as early on as possible is the key.
You talked about The Brutalist as being a film about artistic expression and the importance of artistic creativity. I know it received some criticism for its use of AI in the filmmaking process, which obviously is something that you know a lot more about than I do. But I was wondering how you see that as affecting the future of cinema and of artistic expression more broadly. And is it a threat or a kind of a more complex relationship?
Well, what was brilliant about The Brutalist is that it was harnessing AI in an ethical way. And that is what is so key, is that, AI is here and it's probably going to stay and it exists, but how do we bring together artists and AI in the most responsible and ethical way possible? And the key to the AI in The Brutalist is that it didn't take anybody's work. It was a way of using the technology to enhance with the appropriate permissions of all of the artists involved. And I think that really, really is the key, is we sort of can't pretend it's not happening. We just have to make sure that copyright is protected, that artists are empowered in their relationship to AI. Whether that's going to happen, I don't know, but let's hope.
Maybe one more question at the back. Thank you all. My question is about fun and joy. I think quite often when I'm at the cinema, or more often actually at the theatre, it seems like things are very intense, and art, which is trying to speak to the world as it is at the moment, can be like quite depressing, but very revelatory and give you new perspectives. And I can only think of two things that I've seen recently at the theatre which were really fun and joyful. Most recently, it was Importance of Being Earnest at the National, and before that, a show by a small theatre company that I'm a trustee of called Perfect Show for Rachel, which was, just superb. And I was wondering, can you recommend things that, can bring audiences joy, and how to get more of that in difficult times?
Oh, such a good question. It's hard, isn't it? Because I hear it in myself that I'm drawn to making stories that are kind of tackling what is knotty or difficult in the world. I'm absolutely drawn to, and I'm quite drawn to watching them. But every day, that would be insane. And we do need joy. I really agree. Perfect Show for Rachel is going out on tour. That. But is a wonderful, wonderful piece, which also does, as Felicity was saying earlier, it does have at its core a very important, message or thought about the world. For those of you who don't know about it, it's a show made by two sisters and a company of performers, and one of the sisters is learning disabled, and the other sister is a theatre maker, and they have made a show for Rachel, i.e. she decides, every beat of the show, she decides what the audience see, and it's partly improvised, so there's massive jeopardy, and that is very joyful and very delicious. Oh goodness, recommending things. I find myself being increasingly drawn to musical theatre. So The Curious Case of Benjamin Button just came into my head, which is still running in London, just won Best Musical. It's quite interesting that won Best Musical, because it's made with quite a small company of actor musicians. Some of you might know the film Benjamin Button, but this is told somewhat differently, set on the Cornish coast. It's a story that has sadness in it, but the incredible joy of playing it and of being alive. So there's my one. I recommend that, and I agree, more joy in the theatre. You recommend something. You've made something very joyful, have you not, that's coming out quite soon?
Hopefully it's joyful, yes. But I think actually that in many ways it is, you know, to inform and entertain is the goal. So I agree. You know, entertainment is ultimately to hopefully make our lives better. So it is important that we have things that bring us joy. And yes, I've just made a comedy, an ensemble Christmas comedy about a family who it's the idea of home alone, but rather than leaving a child behind, the family leave their mother behind. So it's quite a good premise to start with. But yes, I think you can have so much more impact often by making people laugh than perhaps making them cry.
Yeah. Yes.
Just one last question, perhaps, within these four walls and this sort of intimacy of the Wadham family. Are there any sort of, can you lift the veil for any new projects in the pipeline?
Star Wars, no. Yes, well, this is the ensemble comedy, is Oh What Fun. And then I have another film, I've completely forgotten the name of it. That's terrible. Well, Train Dreams, my husband can remember. Sorry. I had a turbulent night last night. But yes, a film called Train Dreams, which is interestingly not dissimilar to The Brutalist, not in terms of the story, but in terms of, in many ways, being about the American dream. I don't know why particularly I've been drawn to this theme, but that is with a fantastic actor called Joel Edgerton. And we play a couple in the film, but a very beautiful, meditative story about original settlers in America, in the northwest of America. But also not only being about the American dream, but what it is, what is a life, and what is it that makes a life. So it's quite moving, but quite reflective, and hope you go and see it when it comes out at the end of the year. That's coming out at the end of the year on Netflix.
Well, I'm afraid I have to draw this to a close. Thank you so very much, both of you, for coming here. And, I was thinking when you were both speaking that at a time when humanities education is so imperiled, both sides of the pond, you have both shown what it is to interpret and translate your degree in such inventive and imaginative ways. And you've really redefined your fields in sort of these singular ways that you have. So thank you so much for this conversation. Thank you for coming. We are going to celebrate this conversation at the atrium, which is, we will have several people shepherding us there. But please join me in thanking our wonderful speakers yet again. Thank you.